Hello and good morning from Expo 2020. I'm here at Expo today with a mission in mind. Over the last 5 years, I have traveled to 15 different countries. Today, I want to try and visit all of those countries' pavilions here at Expo. So I'm just going to see if I can make it to all 15 of these pavilions before Expo closes its doors. Let's see what happens. If I have learned anything yet living in Dubai, it's that this city doesn't do anything halfway. In fact, Expo 2020 Dubai is the first world fair in history where each participating country has their own pavilion to show off their history, their culture, and their innovations. Expo 2020 is one of the most visited World's Fairs in history and is also the largest, with 191 countries represented. The first World's Fair might not have been as flashy by modern standards, but was still a marvel of innovation and wonder for its time. Held in 1851 in London's specially made Crystal Palace, the fair, known as the Great Exhibition of Works of All Nations, was intended to showcase the innovations of the Industrial Revolution, such as advanced telescopes and early fax machines. The fair was such a success that the next World's Fair was held just 4 years later in Paris. Since then, World's Fairs have been held in over 20 countries and have introduced ideas such as the washing machine, the Ferris wheel, and even the Eiffel Tower. Walt Disney himself debuted animatronics, now a staple of Walt Disney World, at the 1964 World's Fair in New York City.
Well, these baby brontosauruses are just a few of the hundreds of three-dimensional animated figures developed for the World's Fair.
Expo 2020 is the most recent addition to the World's Fairs and the first held in the Middle East, Africa, and South Asia region. With a budget of $18 billion and a long-awaited opening after 2 years of COVID delay, Expo 2020 opened its doors on October 1st, 2021 to great excitement from people all around the world. Split into 3 distinct districts, the Opportunity District, the Mobility District, and the Sustainability District, Expo 2020's focus is on connecting minds and creating the future. Y'all, I admittedly did not go into my day at Expo with as much of a plan as I soon realized I needed, especially based on the sheer size of this place. Luckily, a very kind man lent me a pen and I got to work mapping out how I would visit every country that I've traveled to. Here are all the places I was attempting to make it in a day. Colombia, France, Cambodia, Peru, Thailand, the Philippines, Singapore, Germany, the United Kingdom, Chile, Canada, Malaysia, and Bolivia. I've been to Ecuador and Iceland as well, but unfortunately neither of them had a pavilion at Expo this year, so for now just enjoy these brief clips of how amazing they are. I traveled to Chile in 2018 on the tail end of a trip to the Uyuni Salt Flats and ended up staying a couple nights in the desert town of San Pedro de Atacama. We did a lot of biking through the desert, meeting friendly dogs, and swam in a lot of very, very salty water. I'm so buoyant! I was excited to find a lot of images of the Atacama Desert in the Chilean pavilion, including some spots and creatures that I had seen myself. In fact, a large focus of the pavilion was on the natural beauty of the country, as well as the diversity of landscapes and food. As the longest country in the world, Chile is home to 5 distinct geographical regions, encompassing the deserts of the Atacama to the glaciers of Patagonia and everything in between. I traveled to Paris as a teenager on my first international trip ever at age 17. I really embraced the Parisian influencer lifestyle and did a lot of taking photos of architecture and casually laughing by the Seine. which is why I was pretty confused when the France Pavilion more closely resembled a spaceship. The France Pavilion was largely focused on its innovations, especially regarding space travel. With a slogan of "We must unlock the world," the pavilion focused highly on the future of space exploration by the French and the planets that they plan to inhabit in the future. There was a pop-up exhibit, however, that quite reminded me of my time in France, featuring the work of Jean-Paul Gaultier, a French haute couture designer whose work truly embodies the history of French fashion across decades. To say his work is amazing would be an understatement. I mean, honestly, just check this out. My next stop was Thailand. I traveled to Thailand during a 3-month post-grad Southeast Asia backpacking trip in 2019, and honestly, my main memories are nearly crashing on a moped and stuffing my face with pad thai pretty much every night. Getting into the Thailand pavilion, however, turned out to be an adventure in and of itself. I think I was the only person in line above the age of about 10 years old, and before I knew it, this happened. Once I made it into the Thailand pavilion, I found it was more of an experience than an exhibit. Meet Rak and Mali, my somewhat creepy animated Thailand hosts who took me on a spaceship ride to learn about Thai innovation. There were also a lot of images of Thai cuisine and culture, and the Thailand pavilion even offered visitors a simulated tuk-tuk ride, which I do have to say looked like it paled in comparison to some of the near-death tuk-tuk rides I actually took in Thailand, but was still fun. Next up, we had Malaysia. Now I have to say, my personal experience in Malaysia was a unique one because unlike a lot of backpackers who travel to East Malaysia, I actually stayed solely on Peninsular Malaysia with a Chinese-Malaysian family friend of ours. My entire trip was about food. I think Mr. and Mrs. Tom were trying to fatten me up before I went back to the US. And so I went from being a vegetarian to eating boiled prawns and steamboat soup and nasi lemak basically overnight. Alternatively, the Malaysia Pavilion focused a lot on the culture and natural beauty of East Malaysia and Borneo, including traditional dances, some of the biodiversity of the country, and a surprisingly long video about technological innovations. While I did learn that Malaysia is the 12th most biodiverse country in the world, I did not see satay with peanut sauce mentioned anywhere, and so for that fact, I was a little bit disappointed. However, they did offer me some lemon cookies on my way out, so I can't say I was completely disappointed with the food experience at the Malaysia Pavilion.
Welcome to Canada!
Next on my list was Canada. I've traveled to Canada twice, one time with my sister to see Niagara Falls and another time with my boyfriend's family to do hiking in Banff National Park. I have to say, the stereotypes about Canadians are so true. I think they are the kindest people I've ever met anywhere in the world, and Tim Hortons is absolutely better than 7-Eleven any day. The Canada Pavilion focused a lot on the natural beauty of the Canadian Rockies, which I loved seeing, even though I practically died hiking up Grotto Mountain in Banff. I was also excited to find a focus on Indigenous tradition, specifically on the Heiltsuk people of British Columbia. The pavilion featured photos and video of native practices, from spawn-on kelp fishery to traditional dance, and featured interpretations by Margaret Brown, a residential school survivor and one of the few remaining Heiltsuk speakers in the world. Right next door was the next stop on my journey, the Philippines. I traveled to the northernmost island of Luzon on my Southeast Asia backpacking trip in 2019 and spent a week traveling up north and a week volunteering in the south with my friend Paul's organization, the Relief Brigade. If you haven't heard of the Relief Brigade, I highly recommend reading their story right here. The Philippines Pavilion was designed in the shape of a coral reef, or a bangkota in Tagalog. The country itself is an archipelago of over 7,000 islands, so the design of the pavilion aimed to evoke the island feel and celebrate the diversity of cultures. From exhibits dedicated to the languages spoken, to art telling the stories of early peoples in the Philippines, this was one of my favorite pavilions that I visited. Plus, they gave me free water, which at the hottest point of my day easily put them at the top of my list. After a quick shawarma break, it was time to head to Mexico. I actually traveled to Mexico right before Dubai, as my partner and I intended to move there, but life has a weird way of throwing you curveballs you never expect. So instead, we spent 1 month living in Oaxaca and eating everything we could get our hands on, from tlayudas to tejate to chapulines. The Mexico Pavilion heavily featured the art of Pepe Sojo, a Mexican landscape and nature photographer. His work for Expo 2020 was focused on the diversity of Mexico and displayed in immersive experiences that guests were invited to walk through. There was also a short video about Mexican mythology and legend, which was heavily Aztec focused. Next up was Peru. I was an exchange student for 6 months in Cusco in 2018, and it really is the place that sparked my love of travel and made me love the world and the people in it. Hola, hola! Visitors were first invited to cross a recreation of Puente Quesehuachaca, the last remaining Incan rope bridge in Peru. I actually visited the real thing during my time in Peru, and a couple recreations throughout Cusco as well. The Peru Pavilion was sorted into 3 sections: La Selva, Los Andes, and La Costa. There was also a section dedicated to Peruvian food, and don't worry, there was plenty of love given to the over 4,000 different kinds of potatoes that are grown in Peru. I'll be honest, the whole thing just really made me miss walks to get picarones, which are a potato-based donut, with my host mom throughout my whole time that I stayed in Peru. Next up was the UK Pavilion. So the UK is the very first country in the world that I ever visited on the first part of my international trip I took as a teenager. This was right before the One Direction indefinite hiatus, and so I definitely spent a lot of time walking around London, trying to be cool and casual in case we accidentally ran into one of the band members out in the wild. But unfortunately, by being cool and casual, I accidentally fell into the Thames and also resembled this beautiful work of art. The UK Pavilion was, quite frankly, a little bit underwhelming. The pavilions featured a series of exhibits showing different contributions from the UK over history, from the telephone to the soup can. One feature of the UK Pavilion that I enjoyed was the Contribute a Word projection. Visitors could contribute a word from their phones, which was then projected onto the side of the pavilion, and I'm glad to see that we have a few Twilight stands here at Expo. Next up was Colombia. I visited Colombia for a week during my semester abroad in 2018. We did a lot of biking through coffee farms and admiring art in Medellin, and also swam in this river which was full of really nibbly fish. I also just found Colombia to be so vibrant. There was music and art and color everywhere. The Colombia Pavilion was one of the most lively I visited, with reggaeton blasting all around from the moment that you walked in, and fresh granadilla available outside the gate. If you know your artists, you might recognize the statue outside the pavilion as a Fernando Botero, a style that actually coined the term boterismo. The inside of the pavilion was equally as vibrant, with bright, colorful images of Colombian biodiversity and culture. The official slogan of the Colombia Pavilion was "the most welcoming place on earth," and the pavilion really gave that vibe, especially because it gave me free chocolate as I left. My next stop was Germany, so I debated even including Germany on this list because I only spent 24 hours in Munich on a long layover in 2019 and basically spent the whole time eating Spätzle and asking people, "Speaking she English?" So when I arrived at the Germany Pavilion, I almost immediately decided that my 24 hours did not warrant a wait in this 3-hour-long line that it took just to get into the pavilion. I don't know if they had free Chrombacker coming out of the ceiling or something, but people were absolutely desperate to get into this pavilion. So I did not go, but enjoy this photo of my boyfriend with a beer bigger than his head during our 24 hours in Munich. My next stop was Cambodia. This pavilion was much smaller than the others I'd visited that day, but reminded me of why I loved traveling to Cambodia in the first place. Cambodia is relatively new to welcoming tourists as the country continues to recover from the Khmer Rouge regime. One cannot visit Cambodia without acknowledging the atrocities of the Khmer Rouge and doing the proper education to understand how it affects the country still to this day. If you're curious to learn a little more about this history of the Cambodian genocide and the Khmer Rouge, I highly recommend the book First They Killed My Father. Yes, I visited the famed Angkor Wat, but I also ate Nom Ban Chak at a food stall with my friend Pan and held on for dear life in the back of a tuk-tuk swinging through Phnom Penh. The Cambodia Pavilion featured many images of temples and beaches, but also shared images of life in the farmlands. With 75% of the country's population living outside of cities, one only has to drive a couple minutes outside of Phnom Penh to see rice paddies as far as the eye can see, and I really felt like the pavilion embodied that spirit. My next stop was Bolivia. My time in Bolivia was short, having only traveled there as a tourist for 1 week during my semester abroad to see the Uyuni salt flats, but it's easily one of the most beautiful places I have ever seen in my life. We spent a lot of time taking in volcano views and admiring llamas, and the Uyuni salt flats were definitely one of those places that are a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Though, a word of caution for the traveler to the Uyuni salt flats, there is only one bathroom at that entire establishment, and yes, I learned that the hard way. The Bolivia Pavilion was another smaller pavilion, but I felt like it captured the spirit of the country, from its dances to its wildlife. There was also an entire area explaining the history of the coca leaf, which is a plant infamously known for its use in the production of cocaine, but actually grown in the high Andes and can be used as a cure for altitude sickness. I think I drank about 5 cups worth on our single day in La Paz. The final stop on my journey was Singapore. I had heard people rave about this pavilion, and honestly, I was not disappointed. I felt like it captured the spirit of Singapore almost exactly as I remembered it, this modern city surrounded in green. I admittedly did not have super high expectations for Singapore before traveling there. I kind of thought, oh, it's a country that's also a city, how much can there really be? But I could not have been more surprised. I loved all the nature and the beauty that was around, and it was really beautiful just getting to experience all the different elements and parts of the city. The real high for me in Singapore, though, was my host brother Jeremy. He was 9 years old, a lover of hamsters, and probably my favorite person I've met on all of my travels.
Hello there. My name is Gina.
The Singapore Pavilion was designed to be a completely net zero energy rainforest. Designed by Singapore-based architecture firm Woha, the space is powered by a self-sustaining ecosystem and aims to serve as an example for how we might integrate nature into our cities in the future to prevent climate change and live more sustainably together. So, was I successful? I guess that's kind of up for debate, especially because it was only after I finished filming this entire video that I realized I didn't even make it to the UAE pavilion, despite literally being in the UAE to make this video. So, as far as the challenge element of this video, that's kind of up to y'all. But as for me, I loved walking around and getting to know a little bit more about some of these countries that I'd visited in the past. And I suppose there's always next time, so maybe I'll see y'all in Osaka.